Hats off to you. About ready for it? Good evening, everyone. It's Monday, November the 4th, and it is 5 p.m., so I'll call our meeting to order for our committee of the whole. I think everyone's got the agenda before them. I was led to believe there may be an additional item for consideration. Chief Cody?
I'd like to have one in-camera labor item.
Thank you. Was there something else that was a mistake? No? Okay. We need a motion. Oh, just so we know, Councillor Connick was not planning on attending this evening. He had some other business to attend to. Just so everybody knows. We have a motion for the agenda. Councillor Gibbs.
I will make that motion with the added item.
Very good. So as amended, all those in, anyone else? All those in favor? Thank you.
Very emotional.
Good thing I'm old now to work on this.
I know, all by yourself.
I think we need to switch it.
Chris, you better go over there, I said.
Didn't hear from. All right. Director Piche, would you care to start with the Local Authorities Election Act updates? Got some information for us. We just, to jog around a bit, but I think we're waiting on another presenter from the other one, so
For sure.
if you go ahead, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Before Council tonight is a high-level summary of the changes to the Local Authority Election Act. These changes to the Act were brought forward after Municipal Affairs conducted broad consultation with Albertans and key stakeholders following the 2017 local elections. Municipal Affairs reviewed all of the consultation feedback and brought forward the proposed changes during the 2018 fall election session. I'm just going to go through some of the fact sheets that were included in the package. So we'll start with nominations. So nominations now will start on January 1st of the year of the election. Previously, it was only for 2 hours, 4 weeks prior to the election. Now, candidates can submit their nomination papers at any time prior to the close of nomination day in the year of the election. Nomination day is now defined as the last day to accept nomination papers 6 weeks prior to the election. For 2021, that will be on September the 7th, and it'll close at 12 noon. Campaign contributions, there's a change in this as well. The maximum contribution an Albertan can make is $4,000. This can be split amongst multiple candidates or be given only to one candidate, but in total, it must not exceed $4,000. Those candidates who choose to self-fund are limited to only $4,000 as well. Previously, that amount was $5,000. Candidates must disclose names and addresses of donors who exceed $50 in contributions now. Previously, it was $100. And candidates are not allowed to receive contributions from prohibited organizations, which include corporations, unincorporated organizations, trade unions, and employee organizations. Only individual citizens residing in Alberta may contribute to a campaign. Campaign spending limits. Now, this is still yet to be determined as it will come out in the new regulations. However, when those regulations come out, Council may opt for a lower amount, and that has to be done by bylaw. A candidate is required to open a separate bank account once their contributions reach a total of $1,000, and this includes the self-funded candidates as well. Previously, it was $5,000. Contributions or expenses may only be received or incurred starting January 1st, 2021, and once the nomination papers have been filed. If contributions have been received outside the nomination period, it cannot exceed more than $2,000. If a campaign has a donation surplus, that surplus will be held in trust by the municipality. The surplus is not subject to interest anymore, and it can be held in one bank account for all of the candidates. If a candidate chooses not to run in the next election, then that surplus may be donated to a registered charity. Advertising and campaign activities at the voting station. Normally, during an election, the LMC is used as the voting station, and this will likely be the case in 2021. The new rules will prohibit any campaign activity or advertising on the property of the LMC surrounding the voting station, and not just inside the voting station. Those found doing so may be subject to a $500 fine. Municipalities must post a list of candidates within 48 hours following the close of nominations. And for voter identification, all voters must have acceptable pieces of identification, and that includes government-issued ID, any one piece of ID approved by the Chief Electoral Officer, and any other type allowed by the Minister of Municipal Affairs or the Minister of Education. Vouching is allowed now, as long as the person vouching for the voter makes a statement saying that they know the person and they know where they reside. A scrutineer for any candidate cannot vouch for a person, and a person who was vouched for cannot vouch for another person. Residency, this is a change that has happened. Prior to this, there's always been a 6-month residency requirement, and that has now been removed. Eligible voters are 18 years of minimum, a Canadian resident, a resident of Alberta, and a resident of the local jurisdiction on election day. The city of Lacombe must hold an advance vote. Any community over 5,000 people in population is required to hold advance voting. There is a new section in the Local Authorities Election Act, and that is regarding third-party advertisers. So this is basically if somebody is not really part of a campaign but is opposing or supporting a candidate. Now these third-party advertisers must register with the municipality. They must file a disclosure statement detailing the advertising, the expenses, and the contributions. And the third party is also required to know who is eligible to make contributions and any limits for all of the reporting requirements for the municipality. These third-party advertisers must adhere to the same rules as a campaign when it comes to who they receive contributions from. Therefore, they cannot receive contributions from any of the prohibited organizations, as mentioned earlier. The city must appoint by resolution a substitute returning officer, and that is in the event that the returning officer is unable to fulfill their duties. Nomination papers. To avoid rejection of any nomination papers, it is important to ensure that they are complete. The returning officer is required to refuse a nomination paper if there isn't 5 elector signatures, the deposit isn't submitted, and if the papers aren't sworn or affirmed. And each candidate may appoint an official agent at the time of submitting their nomination papers, but this is not mandatory. There's been some change to the definition of institutional voting. It is to reflect the care rather than the age now. And when it comes to tie votes on a bylaw or a question, it is now defined as a winning vote to be 50% plus 1 vote. Before it just said more than 50%. Again, this is just a high-level summary to get the information out of these changes out to the council and to the public. And in late 2020 or early 2021, there will be an update to the municipal election bylaw, which will come back to council. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Doesn't seem to be much of them. Pretty straightforward.
That's very good.
bringing that information to our attention. We look forward to a lot of Manganese come January 1st, 2021.
Thank you.
Director Thompson, would you care to go through the Health Canada regulation changes for water service lines?
Absolutely.
Thanks. Item 4.2, everybody?
So in 2019, Health Canada issued new drinking water quality limits that reduce the level of lead that is allowable in drinking water, effectively, well, actually cutting it in half from either 10 or 0.01 milligrams per liter or 10 parts per billion to 5 parts per billion. And in addition, they, in part of their new requirements, they have changed the sampling protocol for how operators can test for lead. Currently, lead is tested at pump houses and at different set locations around the system. And in fact, when lead is primarily in Lacombe would come from, and in many municipalities, come from pipe materials and other metals rather than source water. It leaches into the water and can actually be a part of the drinking water in someone's home. And so the new testing protocols require operators to actually test for lead at the tap. So this is a substantial change into how the city of Lacombe would test for this lead. Alberta Environment has put together a 5-year plan, or at least they've required municipalities to put together a 5-year plan to assess the risk of lead in their communities and to do some additional testing in order to characterize what kind of lead is included in your water system. And so included in the 2020 budget is some additional funding that's already there for this additional lead testing. So what we'll have to do, and we're still reviewing the requirements from Alberta Environment, but we'll have to look at the city of Lacombe, identify, I'll call them hotspots, areas that are that were constructed in that 1950s to 1970s area, and start building a sampling program around those areas. There's a couple ways in which Alberta Environment is allowing municipalities to sample the water. There was a recent article that was published, I think, this morning from Global News that talked about a couple of different ways of lead and how they would, or some municipalities or Health Canada would require taps to be turned on for 5 minutes, and then you'd sample the test. That's kind of like the current way we test for lead right now outside of the home. The new protocol would require a calculation of how much water and how long the service line is from the main to the house, and then you'd have to take different samples, trying to pull different slugs of water from that line at different points along the line through the tap, and those would get sent away for testing to help characterize where, what levels of lead are located in which portions of the line. Because lead could be leaching into a water line from within the home through lead solder or lead pipes within the home. It could be coming from a point on the service between the property line and the house, or it could be coming from the property line and the main, and in the most unlikely scenario, it may be coming from the main. And so that will help to narrow that down. It's not perfect, but it certainly is information that would help narrow things down for further investigation. And so I just want to make council aware that we are working on this, and that we are aware of the new guidelines, and we are working within the timelines developed by Alberta Environment to address the new requirements from Health Canada. Certainly, if there's any questions, we can address it.
Thanks, Director Thompson. Councillor Gullickson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Director Thompson, I just have a question regarding our underground pipes. And when there's been some demolitions and different things happen in the community, we dig up a service and cap it off for whatever reason. Do you have some of that pipe that can be tested and see what how much lead is in it and, or magnesium, whatever we're concerned with? So can you look at the actual pipe itself, and do we have samples of the old pipe?
It's a good question. We may, it's unlikely that we would keep a piece of pipe like that, especially if it was from a demolition. And then we would still be required to test the water at the tap at that location anyway. But if the idea is to use that information to determine how likely it is that there are other lead services within the area, then that's something certainly we would be doing here, is going back to our records and seeing what we have from dig, say, within the last 5 years, to try to narrow down what are some possible hotspots that may require some additional testing or more focused attention over the next 5 years to try to narrow that down.
Has there been any consideration to do that, to get to retain some of that old pipe now that this is out? To do some actual physical testing on the pipe itself to see what those levels are? To me, it just makes sense to look at that source and to say, okay, we really do have a problem, or our problem is very small because the pipe that was used at that time was, relatively lead-free, say, for example.
One of the challenges that can happen is the lead could be coming from different points, even on a service. So the lead, if there's a lead service, it could be between the property line, or from the main and the property line, but then it's been replaced at the property line back to the house. So even if there was a demolition and a service was cut off, say, a meter into the property line, and that's the only point that was exposed, it may appear that there's no lead in that service, but in fact there might be lead between the property line and the main, for instance. Or it could be the opposite, where the city has replaced a portion between the property line and the main, but there is still lead leaded pipe from the property line to the house, or even within the house or the building. And so it's difficult to say whether any one specific point is an indicator for the whole line because of that. And so, but certainly, if knowing these new guidelines, as we're doing digs, we are documenting the pipe material and using that information to help form our sampling protocol moving forward.
So,
Thank you.
Director Thompson, I was just curious, the regulations, well, I appreciate the forwarding of the address and stuff in here, they're fairly involved and lengthy. They seem to deal more with the actual water itself as opposed to the pipes in which they're carried. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, certainly.
Okay, so I guess it just, I don't think it will come as a surprise to anybody to know that we have pure lead pipes in the city at various points. So testing was kind of pointless. Of course, they're going to contain lead, but it's how much is dissolved in the water that's the problem. That's where the measurement comes in, is the water itself, not the pipes that they're carried in.
Yeah, and I understand that, and dealing with underground pipes for years, these standards and how they deteriorated, or corroded, or were different on different, certain pipes. So even though it's a lead pipe, depending on how it was made, for example, might affect the way that it deteriorates. And I just know that you can say, okay, I have plastic pipes. Well, they don't react the same, they're different. And even steel pipes are different underground depending on what their makeup is. So I think there are some possibilities there with, samples of the pipe to know what we're dealing with.
Councillor Jacobson?
Sure, I just had a question, and if you mentioned this in your report, Director, I apologize. So we have been testing since 2010 for these levels, correct?
We do test for lead. It's under a different sampling protocol, but certainly the levels we are seeing now are lower than the lowered levels from Health Canada. So
okay, so
they're under a completely different sampling protocol. So it's hard to say that that's fully reliable data because it is a substantial change on the new sampling protocol.
sure. So that was my question. So we are in fact lower than the maximum allowable. So theoretically, then once this new testing protocols installed, we very well may not have to do anything then, other than keep on testing as per directed.
Certainly that would be an ideal scenario, if the results on their current sampling protocol hold true on the new sampling protocol. Yeah, I do expect there will be some amount of lead detected on service lines, just because we don't have great records of those service lines, especially because it can change along the way between the main to the house and within the house itself.
Chief Cody? Since I guess to both points, I just wanted to point out that we have been testing. However, we've been testing sort of within our own municipal system, and the new testing protocol to be testing at the end of the tap. We are expecting that there will be some issues, and likely not caused by the municipal system, but in the article I was reading this morning that you referenced, actually there is plumbing fixtures for sale in home improvement stores right now that people can purchase and put in new homes that have lead in them. So there is the possibility for this lead to be in the water from any number of sources. I actually doubt that the municipal source is going to be a high component, but I think that the service lines and potentially the fixtures within the house might cause us some issues.
I guess one other thing is identified as the MAC numbers, or the maximum allowable concentration for lead. I think probably most people understand the toxicity of lead. I'm not familiar with manganese. Is this a heavy metal that's of similar concerns, or what's? There's a lot of different elements involved. Why is manganese brought to the forefront now?
So Health Canada actually has quite a broad set of guidelines on a number of different chemicals, very specific limitations on how much each of these different chemicals and metals can be in a drinking water supply. And certainly manganese is one that can be from a groundwater source or from a surface water source. It could be manganese-rich water. But in our case, Red Deer introduces permanganate in their water treatment plant to allay raw water odors at the front end of the plant. But then that's removed through the process, through their treatment process, before it's being pumped down to the communities in central Alberta. And so it's less of a concern because Red Deer tests for that at the plant, and they're within the new limits as far as what they're reporting to us.
Chief Cody?
So the concern, though, however, is that a base level of manganese is actually required for the human body to function, but if it becomes excessive, it actually accumulates within your brain, the basal ganglia of the brain, and so it can be a major problem that can show up in MRIs and that sort of thing. So with the assurances we have from the city of Red Deer, I highly doubt that there will be a problem with manganese, but there is the potential for toxicity to develop if it's in very high quantities.
Thank you. Councillor Hibbs, did you still have a question?
No, the question got answered.
Very good. Go ahead, Cora, thanks.
Whoops. Thanks, Mayor Creasy. So I was curious, this is costing $5,000 in 2020, but is some of this testing going to lead to the city having to remove these lead pipes? Like, is that where this is headed? Is that something we should be aware of as councillors?
It depends if we do find that there are, as CAO Gowdy referenced, say there are lead pipes or lead-containing pipes on the city side. If there's, say, only a handful of them, then maybe the city might pursue that, a replacement option. That's not the only option. City of Edmonton, for instance, adds essentially a chemical to the water that coats the inside of all the pipes in the system, including the surfaces, that can help reduce the amount of lead that leaches into the pipe system. That could be an option. It is fairly expensive, but it might work out to be the better option versus replacement, depending on how many there are. There's also filtration systems that perhaps the city or the resident can look at together. So there's different options, and we really want to try to get the data and understand what we're dealing with and how many there are, if any, that we have to deal with before we recommend a specific course of action. But certainly we want to be looking at that we will be looking at that when we have the data in front of us.
Chief Gotti? So there's a number, a number of options, and we don't know the extent of the problem yet. But if we used the city of Edmonton as a test sample, it could be around $500,000 potential impact to the city of Lacombe. Just scaling their cost for their fix to our city, that would be a rough, obviously it'll vary from there, but yes, there could be a potential impact here for sure.
Would you care to continue on?
Certainly, if there's any other questions, happy to answer.
No, I don't believe that there is. Okay, so, oh, Jennifer is here, I'm sorry. Come on up, Jennifer. Planning Commissioner's here to do the update, our demographics update for immigration and diversity in the city of Lacombe. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I got held up at the tire shop where everyone else is getting their tires done today too. So thank you for rearranging the schedule. So this is the second of 3 presentations on demographics, and today's topic is community diversity. So as touched on before, community birth rates are decreasing, and there is an increased need to rely on new Canadians or people migrating from other parts of Canada to help bolster community population and maintain current levels and to see increases. So just as a little statistic, in Canada, in order to maintain our population, we would have to have each woman giving birth to 2.06 children. And this rate would, replace any mortality and any unfortunate child deaths. Canada has not achieved this rate since 1971. And currently we're sitting at about 1.543 births per woman. So as you can well imagine, if we didn't have immigration, we would be in a lot of trouble. And it should also be noted, just as a side note, that women are also having children at a later age. In '96, it was 28.4 years of age, and we're up to 30.6 as of 2016. So due to this decrease in fertility, Canada, like many other developed nations, rely on immigration to offset our decreasing birth rates. So we'll kind of touch on where our residents come from, so you can kind of get an idea of who exactly lives here. In addition to, the born and bred Lacombians or Lacomites and other people who have relocated from other parts of Alberta or Canada. So we have a lovely chart here that talks about the mobility status of Lacombe residents. So this reflects where residents lived 5 years ago, based on the 2016 census. So just over 50% of people would be non-movers. So they haven't moved house. They're in the exact same spot they were 5 years ago. With the blue, dark blue, that's people who have relocated within the community. The orange is external migrants. So those are people who have moved here from other countries. The lighter orange is intra-provincial migrants, and then the pale greenish turquoise is inter-provincial migrants. So those represent, the intra is people who've relocated within Alberta, and inter is those who have relocated here from outside the province. So approximately 5 years ago, 25% of our residents lived outside of the community, and this represents approximately just over 3,000 people out of the population at the time, which was just under 12,000. So a portion of these Lacombe residents, they've made the choice to relocate here. The largest proportion of this is the intra-provincial migrants. So these are people who have come from other parts of Alberta. And the second largest was the group that came from other parts of Canada. This information provides a bit of an indication of who our new Lacombe residents are, but of course it doesn't provide us with any insight as to why they chose to relocate to Lacombe. If we were to know this reason, it can help the city to determine what assets are really drawing in new community members, and it could help determine what services are really valuable to those people, if these services should be enhanced, or if there's new services that might be warranted for that population. So of course, Canada is a nation of immigrants, and communities like Lacombe were built upon those people who came. Lacombe was marked by early waves of immigrants from Europe, United States, and China came here with the railway. So it's not a new phenomenon here. Everyone came from someplace. So in the 2016 census, of the 12,710 responses they got from the city of Lacombe, approximately 1,200 Lacombe residents identified themselves as immigrants. Of these individuals, almost half of them arrived in Canada since 2001. So there is a graph on the next page that kind of highlights the immigration throughout the different sets of years. So, of course, a large majority of them arrived in Canada before 1981. But other than some lulls in the 80s and 90s, since 2001, those rates have been increasing and could continue to increase. So there are different policies or streams for immigration in Canada. And they vary. So you have economic immigrants. So these people come because the country identifies them as having a value to contribute to our economy. They meet labor need, market needs, the capacity to own or build their own business, to make substantial investments in the Canadian economy, or to create their own form of employment or meet a specific need for a province. This category includes the principal applicant, their spouse, and any dependents they might have. That creates kind of the largest group of immigrants to Lacombe. The second largest would be immigrants sponsored by families. So these are individuals who are sponsored by Canadian citizens and permanent residents in order to facilitate family reunification. So these would be maybe children or parents of an individual who came over to the country. And our smallest proportion is classified as refugees. So these, of course, are people who relocate out of their country due to fear of returning because of persecution, so race, religion, nationality, armed conflict, and so forth. There is also a very small category called other immigrants. And the reason they're let into the country falls outside all of those categories, and they don't provide really further details in regards to that. So as you could well imagine, with this type of diversity comes some challenges with language. So of course, all of our everything we produce at the city is completed in English. And for the vast majority of residents, that works quite well for them. Of the 12,830 individuals who answered the language portion of the census, just over 1,000 indicated that their mother tongue is neither English nor French. And 51 different languages are spoken by this group of people. Despite the amount of people who learn to speak with a different language other than English or French, the vast majority of them have managed to learn at least one of Canada's official languages since moving here. 55 of our residents have indicated that they do not understand English. And this includes 5 individuals who only speak French and 50 that speak neither of the official languages. So this represents less than 0.5% of our respondents or approximate citizens, but it should be acknowledged that this language barrier may prevent them from understanding city communications, accessing our services, or participating in civic engagement. And in turn, it can make it difficult for the city to determine if those residents are having their needs met, or if there's any services that could assist them, just because there is that language gap. So this information does give a bit of an indication of the types of people who are choosing to locate to Lacombe, and that there is different languages and cultures representative in our population base. Of course, it doesn't paint the full picture. There could be some value in attempting to gain insight into what makes Lacombe attractive to these individuals who choose to move here, and what attributes and services are viewed as being particularly desirable. This could help us with assessing the strengths of services, but also being an asset on how we promote and market the community to the greater region, province, country, and even outside. In addition, it would be really good to have a bit more insight into the language component. In particular, there could be some benefits in determining if communication materials such as signage needs to be available in different formats, large print, Braille, French, for instance. If we examine this closely, it could provide ability to provide outreach to new residents and really give them an opportunity to learn about how our local government works, what services are provided, and what the city does, and then of course be able to get their feedback on community projects and events that happen. So those are gaps that if we moved forward with any type of more robust study of the community, those are some things that could be very beneficial in just assessing how things work. So this will lead into the last presentation, which will look more at the education of our residents and the economic stability, so the different income levels and of course what challenges those might provide for residents. So that's a basic rundown.
Thank you, Leonard Kirchner. Councillor Ebbs, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Kersey. I just have 3, I think. So the first one is on the very front page of the memo. It talks about the average age which women give birth, and I'm just wondering if that meant the average age to give birth to their first child, or if that's sort of an average of all children, if they're having 1.5 children. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I think it's for the first time that they're giving birth.
Okay.
That would be, I think, the easiest way for them to create a measurement.
Okay, so that's question number 1. Question number 2 is on the second page. So it's in regards to that lovely little chart, to use their words. It says, 5 years ago, this was their status. Now, is that 5 years ago from today, or 5 years ago from the 2016 census?
So it would have been from the 2016 census.
Okay.
So they would have, you just posed that question of where did you live 5 years ago?
Okay, so essentially like, what, that'd be 8 now, I guess, 8 years ago.
Yeah, so an unfortunate part of census data is by the time they release everything, it's already
fair enough. It just puts it a bit more straighter in my head if I know that. And then the last one was just towards the end here. Oh, yes. So the 50 individuals who speak neither of the official languages, so neither French or English, I don't suppose that we have access to, what languages, like is there a predominant language that those, non-English French speakers are, or do we have access to that, or is it really everything and anything?
Well, they don't specify. They indicate that group of 1,000 individuals speak 51 different languages, but unfortunately they don't provide the information to indicate if they do not speak English or French, which languages they do. Potentially some of the, there's a refugee group out of Red Deer, they might have an indication of maybe what languages might be more prevalent for that group, or some of our service groups as well might have an idea of, what languages are predominant amongst
And when
those
somebody says they don't speak a language, that's them self-identifying, saying that they don't, so that they may have enough to say hello and, something really, really basic, but not necessarily conversant or barely able to get by. So they're saying, I might know a few words, but honestly, I couldn't have a proper conversation, most likely. Okay. I will admit that I found 50 individuals who could speak neither English or French to be a bit surprising, actually. I expected there would be a lot of immigration, especially from some significant groups. I think we're probably all aware of those, but to actually have 50 people that, can't converse in either is surprising. Thank you.
I was quite surprised by that number as well. So that does pose a challenge in engaging them, and obviously they don't typically come to our events, so that it's not a population group that we've engaged with and noticed that gap before.
Very good. Anyone else? Councilor Hibbs, go ahead.
Sorry, I just thought of this just after. Thank you very much. Do you know if I suppose every immigrant is, well, actually I have two questions. Every immigrant that comes to town isn't going to need the service, but if they were to require a service, like if they would be directed in a community to go to this organization or that organization, do you know what that might be in our community?
I know there's a Central Alberta refugee group that I imagine for those individuals who come for that reason, they are introduced to that service. But I know that there is obviously programs that the federal government provides. I imagine they would be located in the larger urban centers. So it would be interesting to know what services there actually are, and if there is any benefit for the municipality to get in touch with them to see if there's any way that these people can become more involved despite language gaps or cultural gaps.
And then just that second question that I just remembered, when we were talking about immigration, I think it talked about that these people again are sort of self-identifying, and I'm just wondering if that other category may include people that would be here on, more of a temporary, like work visa or something like that. Would that be considered to be under the immigration umbrella, or would that be excluded completely, or is it possible that some of those people could have put themselves in that category, maybe not really understanding the difference?
I would imagine, given the way they frame immigration, there's some sense of permanency in them coming to the country. I think it may be a more, I don't know if it's political scenarios that are a bit more one-off type allowances and to enter into the country, but it would most likely not be anyone who's here with a temporary visa or a temporary work permit or anything like that. It would be people who have been let into the country with the expectation that they'll either be permanent residents or become citizens at some point.
Thank you.
Anyone else before we move on? Appreciate it, Planner Commissioner. Thanks for your time. Chief County, item 51A, CAO report.
Normally, I do not include a CAO report in the committee meetings. However, it was missed last meeting, so the correct one was uploaded here. I can answer any questions that you may have.
So given that you have it listed under administrative items here, the recruitment for the Senior Manager of Financial Services was completed. I believe that an email was circulated as well, so just so everyone's clear, the start date for that individual is when? Verification?
December 1st.
Thank you very much. Coming right up. We've got a few lights on here. Councilor Ross, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Just out of curiosity, is the meeting with the city director a regular occurrence, or is there some specific more to that of what issues there may be that was shared.
Excuse me, we do meet with the City of Red Deer, CAO and Mayor, excuse me, regularly, the Mayor and I, at events like the Mid-Sized City Mayor and CEO Caucus. This is a new CAO at the City of Red Deer, and he's meeting with the, excuse me, there were various regional partners in the area as part of his onboarding process, so he'll be meeting with the town of Black Falls, Red Deer County, ourselves, and probably Lacombe County as well.
Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. My question, what's his name? I noticed.
His name is Alan Seabrook. He comes to the City of Red Deer from Ontario, and forgive me, I don't remember the exact community, but he worked there as commissioner and I believe a senior leader in the organization for some time.
So it looks like there's a pretty important item there under external recognition. What's that all about?
Well, that is the City of Lacombe, once again being ranked the fifth best place to live in Canada, just by a different publication. Again, the best place in Western Canada, actually, and so it is just another, I guess, recognition of the city. You know, I can't put much faith in fifth best place versus fourth or 10th, but as a great place to live, and that things are on the right track here at the City of Lacombe. So it's nice to see that continued recognition of the city and the work that council and our organization are doing here.
I agree with you, the fifth place one is hard things are at, but the first in Alberta and first in Western Canada, I think we can all appreciate that. Councillor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Getting back to the City of Red Deer, the previous CAO wasn't really in favor of collaborating for any recycling. Was this one any more lucrative to that?
I don't think we didn't really get to that level of detail on the solid waste management, but he did seem very receptive to regional approaches to various issues and seemed really open-minded, so I'm sure that'll come up in the future.
Anything else? I think that pretty much concludes our business, does it not, other than the in-camera item that we have? Anybody have anything else? No? All good? That's good. So, one of the few motions that we can entertain. Councillor Hibbs?
I move that we move in camera.
Thank you very much. It is 5:49 and we will do just that.